Hi, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate Rural Talk Radio, which is a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Our mantra is educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guest may not represent those of the host of the station. Folks, I'm so excited because I have phenomenal guests on, and I have a phenomenal guest on today. Before I introduce my guest, I have to give a shout-out because I always forget. But I want to give a shout-out to Lisa Warren, who is president Lisa Warren PR, who sends me wonderful people to interview, and my guest happens to be one of them. So thank you, Lisa Warren, for sending me your wonderful clients. My guest today is the wonderful Malia C. Lazou. She is the author and writer of the book From Intention to Impact, a practical guide to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Malia is an award-winning tenured strategist in diversity, inclusion, and the lecturer in the technological innovation, entrepreneurship, and strategic management group at the MIT Sloan School of Management. She is former executive vice president and regional president of Brookshire Bank and a community organizer, and the creator of several accelerators designed to support minority-owned businesses in the Boston area, as well as the consultancy of the Lazou Group. Very busy woman. Thank you, Malia, for coming on. Welcome, Malia C. Lazou.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I just love your energy, and I know we're going to have a good talk.
We are. Malia, I always ask all the authors that come on, what motivated you to write this book? Because we all know how important diversity, equity, and inclusion are, and how it is to the workplace.
Yes. You know, I think we all at times, right, think we have a book in us, right? We have something to say, and so often we don't get that chance. And so when MIT Press approached me and asked if I had a book in me, right, if there was something I wanted to write about, I thought it was really important for someone to not only make the business case for DEI, but then lay out some practical guides, right, some practical tactics that companies could take to achieve the benefits that diverse communities bring.
Absolutely. And I know, Malia, and I'm sure you've encountered this because I hear it on TV. I'm going to be devil's advocate here for a minute. You hear it on TV, you hear it among certain groups. Well, if places have DEI, then they're just picking from a certain group of people, and that's not giving everyone access. And then how do you know that person's really qualified? How do you deal with attitudes like that? Because it drives me nuts.
Right. I think it's first important to remember that attitude is a projection, right? Because it, in fact, is expressing what is currently the case, right? And what we know is currently the case is that you have more men named John that are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies than you have women. So when you tell me that we're only picking from a certain pool, it can't be any narrower than straight white men who have, college degrees, right? Like it can't be any more narrow than that. And I think, because we see hetero, white, masculine as the norm, we now somehow see us looking at the rest of the world as being a narrowing in focus. And I think it's important to point that out to people, right? That this idea that being more inclusive means that you're going to get less talented people is to not understand the laws of numbers, right? And not understand how genius actually works. Like, it's actually not given to only straight white men, which probably means you have a lot of people who aren't qualified now to be running companies, because we were just taking from that small pool of straight white men.
That's a very good point. And actually, I have to throw this in, speaking of straight white men, because I do watch a podcast, and I won't mention the name of it. And even in the beauty industry, gay men, transgender men are having a difficult time getting the same credit, getting the same opportunities as these female beauty influencers.
That's right.
And
that's right.
These, and these companies that say, oh yeah, they're inclusive, they're not really being inclusive, because they will not have these men represent their company, because of, oh no, we can't do that, because that's going to turn people off.
Well, and I think, right, this is the case. Oh, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, that's okay.
Oh,
go ahead.
I was like, you just got me so excited. I'm like, yes. This is, this is why I work so hard to make the business case, right, in my book, because I feel what's happening right now is that we like to say data is what moves people. And, ultimately we know that's not necessarily true, right? Because if it was, I'd go to the gym a lot more and I'd be a lot more healthy in my eating. But, but what we know, right, statistically, is that a majority of Americans actually want to live in an inclusive world. And because of these false equivalencies that are being drawn politically, it's really hurting our business and our economy from being able to compete in a global market, right? And so, we're not a divided country 50-50. Like, that's not the case, right? 80% of Americans polled believe that LGBTQ people should have representation, right? But because the voices that attack folks like Budweiser, who bring in, some, this wonderful influencer named Dylan, right, who was a trans influencer, and they got pushback, they then decided to move away from public sentiment and move towards politics. And I think, the case I make for in my book is that we can't and shouldn't be political, right? That we are looking at employees and consumers. That's how businesses thrive. You have to have people who want to work for you. Those people have to be talented, and you have to have customers that want to buy your stuff. And that's America, right? That's everyday person walking around the street. And so if you want to respond, again, to this voice that has power because of racist traditions like the Electoral College, right, which overstates, right, or media needing to have this, something to write about, right? They need the conversation to bleed somewhere. So what better than a fight, right? So this idea that we're in a fight, we're just in a fight politically. And I think what CEOs are struggling with and business managers are struggling with right now is that they know that. Bob Iger from Disney knows that he can't turn off the LGBTQ community and the Black community, right? He knows that. And so even though DeSantis is threatening to build a jail by Disney, what he knows is that Princess Day includes a lot more than little white girls, and that's how Disney's going to continue to grow their market.
I live in New Jersey, Malia, which is very diverse. extremely diverse. Wasn't always like that, but it's very, very diverse now. And I know I personally am happy to see more diversity in all areas. You know, when I go to the store, I'm glad. In places that I've worked, you see many different types of people, all colors, all races, religions, and I go back to, this might sound off the wall to you, but I go back to the sandbox. I worked in a preschool. Nobody cares. Children don't care about the color of your skin. They don't care if the other child has a disability. They don't even notice it. They work together, and they help each other. And it's when adults spew their hatred that the children hear it. And that, therein, I think, is the problem. How do you, Malia, in your book, or I should say, how do you get, I want to call it the Good Old Boys Network, to change, to have that in mind?
Right. I don't know if we get them all to change, right? But that's one thing about Mother Nature, is that you get new old people every day, right? As I'm seeing with myself, right? As I'm becoming a bona fide auntie and someone who has been, generationed out of what's cool. It happens every day. And so that's going to happen naturally, right? Gen Z feels very differently than boomers do. And it's not just about avocado toast, right? Like, these are kids, young people who want clean air. They want clean water, right? They want to have full access and decisions to their bodies and the bodies of their friends and partners, right? So, it's important for us to remember that some of this is happening whether the good old boys want to have it happen or not. Eventually we will not be able to compete in a global economy, right? We just won't. And I think the business people who are, in fact, forward-thinking understand that at a fundamental level. And, my book is to reach them, right, to reach the folks that understand that we actually do need to figure this out and want to do it without making a lot of public mistakes, right? Really learning internally before you go externally is one of the things I talk about in the book. But I also think it's important for us to remember that, like, we don't get everybody, right? Like, grandpas have hardly been at the forefront of movements, right? It's just, one, they live long lives. They shouldn't need to be fighting like that. And two, a lot of times they are the establishment, so they're not naturally going to innovate, right? Marvelous Marvin Hagler had this great quote about when he retired. And they were like, "Why are you retiring? You're still a great boxer." And he said, "Because it's hard to get up and train when you're leaving silk sheets." Right? There's a certain complacency that comes with comfortability, that comes with age, and I think we should embrace that, right? But we should also recognize then, and they might not be the ones driving these next cars, right? They're not the ones whose maps we should necessarily be following, and really plot this way forward, where for the first time in a few generations, right, we're seeing the largest generational wealth transfer to millennials, who are larger than boomers were by numbers. They're also, more inclusive. They're more brown. They're more fluid. And they're inheriting these good old boys' money, right? And so the change is happening whether you want to admit it or not. And I think what keeps us competitive is us understanding that it might not be the good old boys leading this one.
Yes. You can, like only hope, right, for change. Do you go into business places and hold trainings and seminars? And that's why to get your book out. I was wondering that.
Yeah, no, I do some trainings. I work primarily with businesses, and we will do some training because you need learning. But I really get into product development and systems change. I like to bring up the old Peter Drucker quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so trainings are a part of what we do, but our primary work is working with business teams to get to the core of how do you include diversity in the business model.
Yes, and that's what brings me to, in your book, you do mention 3 L's and how they can help make all of us ready to enter any community. Can you explain that?
Ask me again. I'm sorry. I lost you.
The 3 L's. That's okay. Yes. The 3 L's.
So I'm so happy you asked me that, because one of the things that I'm finding as I've been, going around, selling and talking about my book, right, like selling my wares, is the 3 L's is something that I really love, and it's really been resonating with people. And so I think, this is how we want to think about how we go into communities. And you can do this if you're thinking about your church community, your PTA community, your bowling community, right? Whatever it might be that you might be wanting to include others, right? And so the first thing that you want to do is listen. And listen means keep your mouth shut. Listen means that your ears are working, right?
I love that.
You're not assuming. One of my friends, she has this great saying, listen to be changed. And I absolutely love that, right? You want to listen to be changed, right? And you want to listen to the voices of the community you're getting to know, right? So if it's women, you want to listen to women voices and diverse women voices, right? White women, black women, straight women, gay women, trans women, right? Jewish women, Muslim women, Catholic women, agnostic women, spiritualist women, right? Wiccan women, right? You want to listen to as many women as you can. And then once you've done that, that helps you understand what's been being said, right? So you don't come in being like, you know what you should do, ladies, right? But you understand why we're still needing to talk about this. And then you come into the community to learn what needs to be done, to learn how to actually respond. What is the community asking for? What do they need, and how can you help? Because they know specifically whoever you are, what you can do with the talents you have, right? Then it just becomes a question of how willing you are, right? But they are very clear on the things that they need from you, right? How you could be helpful. And then it's with that knowledge and with the community leading you that you take loving action, not just action, but loving action. And this gets to the core of our democracy, right? Demos works with Philos, right? Our democracy works when we have a siblingly love for one another, right? That's when our democracy works. And so I'm bringing that back for us to rediscover how we find one another, right? For us to remember, what's at the core of some of our founding documents, right? And what it ends up looking like is the action you take is then relevant to the community. It matters to them. And so the example I talk about in the book is after George Floyd and his murder, obviously companies were trying to figure out what to do, right? How do they respond? How do they separate themselves from this type of institutional violence, right, and state violence? And they were making statements and doing all of this stuff. And State Street, right, very large bank, depending on the day, right? They're like the second or third, I'm not sure, right, like largest bank in the world, right, $44 trillion. Huge bank. And Ron, who works very closely, Ron is the CEO, and Ron works very closely with the IDE office, the guide office, which is their DEI office, right, at State Street. And the head of the office, this gentleman named Paul Francisco, an Afro-Latino, said to him, we need to come real. We need to talk about how we're making structural change at State Street. And so they put out this 10 actions that State Street was doing to work to eliminate racism within their company and hopefully industry. And this was specifically for Black people. And it said that explicitly. And at first, right, there was pushback, right? Will you be able to do this? It's only for Black people. And Ron said, this is about the people who are being attacked today, right? This is a statement for the Black people in the U.S. This isn't for everybody, but I need to make this statement for them. And so they did. And guess what happened? Regionally, people understood what was done, and now different regions are having these conversations, right? What is racism? What is the othering, right? What is the classism? What is it that others and divides them in their different regions, right? So that's a loving action that then other people could use, right? And it was well received within the company, outside of the company, versus, right, like nationally after George Floyd, what we did as a country is we declared Juneteenth a federal holiday. And if you talk to Black people, that's not what we were asking for. We were asking for the George Floyd Police Reform Bill, which was called the Michael Brown Police Reform Bill, which was called the Trayvon Martin, right? Like going back, right? So, this idea that somehow Juneteenth should help Black people feel that they belong in this country it's just not true, right? Because it actually is like, it shows that you don't know what we're asking for, that you don't actually know how to love us as a country, right? And so that's what makes that loving action so important, because there are people and companies who think they did something by declaring a Juneteenth holiday. And it's not that it's not important. It was a very important, solemn holiday for Black people, right? But it wasn't a loving action at that moment.
Yes, I could understand that. I'm a child from the 60s, so I always say on my show, what do people want? Everybody. What does everybody want? And that's to work and to live in a place that is safe, inclusion, and to feel part of community.
That's right.
And I think DEI has always been, but it just wasn't called that back then.
Right. Well, and not everyone was included in it, right? So, I mean, this idea of belonging, it is really it's how you raise kids, right? Like you were talking about you were talking about the children, right? Like we teach children to be fair and to share and to, right? And then we spend, the rest of the time indoctrinating them to do the opposite, right? And so it is so important for us to, just recognize and acknowledge that us bringing people in and feeling that, that sibling love, right, and accountability actually feels a lot better and is more natural than us hating ourselves or hating one another. You know,
Exactly.
It's actually more natural for us to get along.
Yes, and I always say, you know, we are more alike than different. And, you know,
right.
we all bleed the same color blood. And I just think, Malia, we need to bring back humanity. Throw that in the DEI, because people are just so cold and indifferent sometimes to each other. And I know really firsthand, because of my son having a disability, how important inclusion and belonging is, and diversity. My son has a job coach. When he went to this particular place in the mall, and they said they would work with him, and well, in 2 weeks they wouldn't accommodate him, knowing what his situation was. They wouldn't even let him have his job coach to help him.
Oh.
And they made him a nervous wreck. And you know what? I'm a mama bear. Don't make me bring out my claws. So she said, well, you have no business, you know, talking to me. I talked to the manager. I said, well, you knew what his availability was. So I said, you know, Josh, just quit. You'll get something better. I called up their ethics hotline, and I said, if you want to hire people with disabilities, that's wonderful, but you have to work with them. And they should be able to have their job coach. And I don't know if it's a coincidence. After that, they cleaned house in that store. They got all new people.
Really?
And I don't know if it had anything to do with my phone call, but they were nasty. They were even nasty to my son's job coach. And he found, my son doesn't drive, but he could walk. He works for a school bus company, and they have DEI. They have a lot of the aides have disabilities. They're very good to their employees, and it's wonderful. He feels part of the community. And there's so many other people.
Right. Because he's providing value.
Yes,
he's providing value to this company, and that we all want to know that we're contributing, right? Like that's what drives fulfillment, right? Like it's about knowing that you're contributing to your tribe.
Yes, and you know, when people have a job and they're in the community, they feel part of that community. They feel like they are contributing, and people can contribute. People with disabilities, no matter what, we could, like, I go on and on. I've interviewed many people with disabilities, and all they want is a chance. All they want is to be treated with respect and dignity, just like everyone else. And it's like we need to get back to that. You know, we need to get back to that. And I always would tell the kids when I was in preschool, well, how would you like to be treated like that? You know, how would you want that someone did that to you? And, you know, to think about, like, how were we treating our fellow coworker, someone in the store? And I have to ask you this, because I really loved Harry Belafonte's music, and I know you talk about this in your book, but how did Harry Belafonte influence your career?
I like to say he influenced me, right, and who I am, which allowed me to do so many things, you know. But I think at the core, if I were to bring it down to a word, it would be integrity. And, you know, this was a man who had the world at his fingertips, right? He was gorgeous. He was famous. He was rich. He could sing. He could dance. He could act, right? He got all the blessings, right, when it came to genetic talents. And he chose to walk and be, you know, and walk in the footsteps of Paul Robeson, and to fight for liberation of people around the world. And because of that, he paid a price, right? He was blacklisted. It's not like he died in poverty, but we don't honor him in the same way that we honored a Sidney Poitier, let's say, right? And, you know, and here was a man who bought Martin Luther King his house, right? Bought Martin Luther King his life insurance. So his family was not destitute after Martin was killed. And, you know, and he paid a price for that. He was blacklisted because of it. And so to see someone who does that, because what you often see is people explaining that those are the reasons why they can't, right? They can't lose what they have. And for a lot of us, that's a reasonable thing, right? Well, you don't want to lose. And Harry lost a lot for doing that, you know, and he talks about in his autobiography, you know, his therapist was an FBI informant. You know, I mean, it was, you know, he chose to do something that made him an enemy, and that cost him. And so to watch a man who within the movement walks with that kind of integrity is the biggest thing I took away from him.
How did you meet him?
So I met him working for the Institute for Policy Studies, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C., and he was on the board. And we met, and I didn't really fully understand who he was. You know, I mean, that he wasn't of my generation. And so I knew him more as like the guy off of the Muppets, Beetlejuice, you know, Beach Street. And I think, quite honestly, he got a kick out of that, you know, that, like, I was more impressed with the fact that he did Beach Street than anything else.
It's just incredible, you know, connections. And I didn't know all that about Harry Belafonte, you know, vaguely. Like, I remember his music. I don't remember. Of course, it probably wasn't, well, I didn't read the papers back then, to know that he was blacklisted. And it just shows you, Malia, when people stand up for what they believe is right, they do pay a price for it. A lot of times. You know, Martin Luther King Jr. paid the ultimate price. People pay with their life. They pay with, you know, people get often, unfortunately, death threats that you have to take seriously because they're standing up. It was very dangerous sometimes to say what you believed in, especially back in the, I want to say the 50s and definitely, you know, the 60s. There was a lot of Hollywood actresses that were blacklisted because people thought they were communists. It was, you know, America's been through a tough time. Still, you know, I'd rather
for us remember that justice doesn't come naturally to us, right? Like, I mean, it did when we were putting, you know, when founding fathers were putting pen to paper. But even then, right, the most radical of thought, right, of who's human and who's not was crossed out, right? And so I think, you know, it's important for us today to think like, would you have been supporting Martin Luther King, or would you have seen him as Black Lives Matters and something that you're going to dismiss, right? Because that's who he was at the time. Like, King would be really shocked at how loved he is right now. You know, because he'd be like, y'all killed me. Like, you needed to kill me in order to, you know, like it's, and so it's important for us to just not take our progress for granted, and understand that the people who are asking for progress now are closer to what King was doing in the 60s than anyone saying that we've achieved and we can just stay where we are.
I remember I was 9 or 10 when Dr. Martin Luther King was murdered. And I can remember it as plain as day. I think I was watching I Dream of Jeannie. Okay? So, and I didn't know who he was. And they cut off the program. I yelled to my mom, "Mom, Dr. Martin Luther King died, and I Dream of Jeannie's not on." And then I found out who he was, but it didn't really register because I was young. You know, and we weren't taught in school at that time. We were not taught civil rights. We weren't taught all aspects of American history, the dark side, I want to call it, the not so good things that that happened in America. You know, I would rather live here than anywhere else, but, you know, America does have its not so pleasant and nice things that they did to people. Let's face it. And we need to address that. And I, remembered the, the riots that happened, and because I, was young, and I didn't even know what was going on in Newark at the time. I actually interviewed someone last year about the riots in Newark, and had no idea what happened and what caused that. You know, it was something that, just not being taught in the schools. I hope inclusion, if you want to call inclusion, in education, Malia, I want to see history being taught to include everyone and the dark side, as I call it. Let's admit what happened, of what went on in America. And I just really, like I said, I'm the child of the 60s. I believe in peace, love, and brotherhood, sisterhood. It's just how I feel. Like, I know I just want to live in peace, and I'm sure most people do. How did DEI become your life's work?
I think it was just a natural extension of the journey. I left the nonprofit world and working for Harry, and I started working for CEOs who were trying to make a substantial difference. And that really gave me an opportunity to, see that that there's no objective, what I would consider organizing happening amongst companies, right, in business. They're organized by, different business associations whose mission is not necessarily accountability, right? It might be a piece of their mission, but that's not really their mission. And so, I thought it would be a good place for me to be in helping companies who authentically want to figure this out, helping them do that.
Well, I commend you for your work that you are doing, have done, and will continue to do. And I want to thank you for coming on Chatting with Betsy. And where can people find your book, Malia, From Intention to Impact, a practical guide to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
That's it. And you can find it at your local bookstores. You can get it on Amazon as well. And you can get it from on MIT, or you can get it off of my website, which is thelazoogroup.com, LAZU.
I was just going to ask you about a website. So thank you. I was just going to ask about that. Folks, I always like to tell you, all the audience, go on the guest website, because there's so much information about Malia Lazu, what she does, that I can't, it would take me the whole show, because Malia is wonderful. There's so much to say about you, your work, and I want people to go on your website and to learn about you. I hope companies will contact you. I hope they read your book, and I hope change happens. I want to see change happen, folks, in these communities, in schools. I've faced racism. I've seen racism in the workplace. Let's change. And the other generations are changing, because I know my son, he doesn't care. He could care less what somebody is.
That's right.
He really, because I taught him that. I didn't teach him to segregate himself.
That's right.
Like I was taught, back in the Stone Age, I call it. But it's just really nice to see people and children just get along, together. And we can get along in the workplace, and we can improve the workplace environment and include people. And folks, I know I've said this before, and I'll say it again. You don't have to like somebody and for them to work next to you. You just have to learn to get along, because not everyone's going to like you either. That's what I tell my son. Not everyone's going to like you, and you're not going to like everyone. And that's okay. That's okay. But that doesn't mean you have to harm them either. Because you don't like their skin color, their religion, or whatever it is, that their gender, whatever they identify with, doesn't give anyone the right to bully and to harm somebody. That's a no-no. And we just need to get along. And that's my soapbox, Malia. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show, and best wishes to you and all that you do. Excuse me, folks.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate you.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Folks, all the information about Malia, and I'm going to spell the name Malia, the letter C, it's her middle initial, Lazu. You heard her today. All the information about Malia is going to be in the blog that Jeannie White, is the station manager, writes. And I thank Jeannie White for all she does and produces the show. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, who's CEO of Passion World Talk Radio, who makes this all possible. And I want to thank you, the listeners. Please share this show. Please tell your friends. I want to help as many people as possible. I have all different types of guests on all facets of life, and about the facts of life, too, which you learn on my show. And I just am here to help people. I want to just help brighten up this universe. And I know my guests do that. And I just want to just encourage you all to subscribe. It's for free on Spotify, iHeart, Amazon Music, Apple, to name a few. And as I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you could be anything, to please be kind and shine your light bright, because we need that now more than ever. And that's the show for today. You could follow me on Facebook if you'd like, Betsy E. Wurzel, Wurzel. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Chat with you soon. Bye-bye now.